Will Justin Trudeau hang on? Today is election day in Canada, and out of respect for our neighbors and listeners to the north, and because it's so darn interesting and may have implications for the American midterm elections next year, I want to talk about the Canadian election and do so with an expert. That would be Dr. Dwayne Bratt, a professor of political science in the Department of Economics, Justice, and Policy Studies at the Mount Royal University. And Dr. Bratt, I should point out that you're located in Calgary, and that in and of itself is of political significance. Explain.
Well, first, I'm outside of what we call the Laurentian elite, the Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa axis. So in American terms, I'm outside of the Washington, New York axis, and I'm more like Denver.
I appreciate the analogy. And by the way, I have questions beneath your pay grade. Explain it to me like a BLT, a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. Break it down, because many of us don't know, frankly, what we ought to know about your political system. It's not necessarily a vote today for Trudeau, right? Your model is like the model in the UK.
Yeah, it's a parliamentary system. So the best analogy I can make for an American audience is, imagine there's no election for a president, but there is an election for the House of Representatives. So everybody selects their local member of Congress, in this case, your local member of parliament, and then the parties that win the most seats choose who the prime minister will be, or the speaker of the House in the American case. That's probably the best comparison that can be made. So it's not one nationwide election, it's 338 separate individual races across the country.
And for example, I wouldn't even see Trudeau's name on a ballot if I were voting somewhere in Canada today?
Only if you were in Montreal, Papineau, which is Trudeau's riding. Everywhere else, you would see the local candidate, but they do list the party affiliation. We do know through political science research, however, that these campaigns are very much leader-driven, and the votes are based on party identification or your support for the leader. Your local candidate, it matters a lot less these days, which is actually an unfortunate element now of Canadian democracy. There are exceptions. We've actually had some independents win, but those are few and far between. Largely, it's driven by the leaders and the leaders tour and the national advertising that occurs.
Well, is that also tethered to a rise in polarization? Obviously, you pay attention to what goes on here in the States. Is your model like ours in that sense?
We don't have the same degree of polarization, but there is an element of it. And it's what we call this brand new, well, not new party. It existed in 2019 and it had less than 2% of the vote, called the People's Party of Canada. They are on the far right fringe, but their support has dramatically increased to anywhere from 5 to 8 to possibly even 10% of the vote on an anti-vax, anti-COVID restrictions mandate. So the difference is they're not part of the mainstream, let's say, conservative party. They're their own separate party because we have a multi-party system. So the major party leaders did a public service announcement talking about the importance of vaccinations, get your jab. And Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party, is advertising with him without a mask and all the other leaders with a mask on. So it would basically be if Trump hadn't taken over the Republican Party, but had created his own small party. So we've got polarization, but not nearly to the same degree as the United States.
Dr. Bratt, do you have a polarized media?
We don't. We have small sort of non-mainstream medias, but we don't have the equivalent of MSNBC, and we don't have the equivalent of a Fox News. We do have, because the population base isn't big enough to support that. Sun TV tried to become what they called Fox News North, and there simply wasn't enough money and market share for them. That, I think, is one of the reasons we don't have that degree of polarization. So we have these small startups that are on the fringes and fundraise, but they don't have the magnitude of the mainstream media. So that's another big distinction.
What about in the internet world? What about in the blogosphere? You know, here in the United States, you could go to Drudge and Breitbart on the right. You could go to Slate and Salon on the left. Are there similarly
There's
left and right?
a handful on the left, but Canada largely is a center-left country. We're kind of situated between where the Europeans are and where the Americans are. So these startups all occur on the right. So and they would argue that the mainstream media, the CBCs, the CTVs, the Globals, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, Post Media, they're all lefties. I don't take that impression. I think we have diversity, but you probably are familiar with these sorts of arguments that are made. The other big thing is Canada's a multi-party system. So our Liberal Party, which Justin Trudeau is the Prime Minister of, and is likely to eke out another minority government, would be like your Democratic Party. We have the Conservative Party led by Erin OToole, would be similar to your Republican Party, but then we've got other parties. So we have the New Democratic Party, which would be as if Bernie Sanders and AOC had their own party, right? So they're to the left of the Liberals, and they want pharmacare, and they want dental care, and the ultra rich are going to pay for everything. And then we've got, as I mentioned, the People's Party, which would be if the Trump people went and formed their own party, and they're splitting some votes away from the mainstream Conservative Party. And then just to add to the confusion or the fun, we have the Bloc Québécois, which is either a Quebec separatist party or a Quebec nationalist party, depending on what your view is. And they only operate candidates in Quebec. They're only appealing to Francophone Quebecers, but they'll get 30 to 40 seats today. And the problem with that is in a minority situation, no party can work with them. No party can work with a separatist party, but they've hived off those seats, and all they're interested in is how to benefit the province of Quebec.
This is excellent. And Dr. Dwayne Bratt is giving me exactly what I had hoped that he would deliver. Am I right in saying from a distance that the issue today seems to be whether Prime Minister Trudeau was too clever by half in scheduling the election when he scheduled the election?
Oh, absolutely. Under the Canadian system, we don't have fixed election dates. By the Constitution, we have to have them within 5 years. We have a law, but it's basically symbolic, and there's so many loopholes that it's irrelevant. So in mid-August, Trudeau called the election. He still had another 2 years in his mandate, and he couldn't tell the Canadians, and he still can't tell Canadians why he called it. I mean, the truth is, his staffers thought that with the poll numbers that he could turn his minority government, meaning he has less than 50% of the seats, into a majority government, more than 50% of the seats. But you can't go out and say to people, I'm calling this election for the self-interest of the Liberal Party and the self-interest of Justin Trudeau. So he walks around all of that, and the opposition parties just hammer him. We have a very short election season. It's only 35 days, thank God. But the day that the election got called was the day that Kabul fell. And like the US, we have Canadian citizens in Afghanistan. We were part of that military mission for over a decade. We have interpreters and staffers who couldn't get out. So there is the Prime Minister announcing we're going to the polls when this international crisis is hitting. In addition, in my province, and in other parts of the country, there's the fourth wave of COVID that are hitting. And so he's sitting there trying to explain why he needs to call this election in the middle of an international crisis, in the middle of a domestic health crisis, and he can't tell the truth because the truth is he wanted a majority government.
Isn't the truth that he was feeling particularly strong at that time?
Oh, yeah. The polls showed him at 8 to 10% above the Conservatives, but it was very soft. It was soft support because many Canadians didn't know who Erin OToole, the Conservative leader, was. Erin OToole had become Conservative leader in August of 2020, but because of COVID, Parliament was done virtually. You didn't see a lot of exchanges between OToole and Trudeau because Trudeau was rolling out all of these vaccine procurement programs and economic supports for businesses and individuals. The attention of the media was all on Trudeau. So nobody outside of close political watchers knew what Erin OToole was. Then the campaign goes and people are watching Erin OToole for the first, I would say, 3 weeks and go, he looks good. We like him. He doesn't have the glamour and the sheen and the arrogance and some of the fakery, quite frankly, of Justin Trudeau. The Justin Trudeau won in 2015 as this burst of energy. You know, the son of a very popular Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau,
Sure.
good looking family, rich, fluently bilingual, great emotional intelligence. But 6 years down the line, that's lost it. He's been embroiled in a number of scandals.
I'll bet he would say spoken like a man from Calgary instead of Toronto, Montreal, or
Yeah.
Ottawa, right?
Yeah.
I
And
wanted to ask you,
in my part of the country, they despise Trudeau because they also despised his father.
could I color shade a map of Canada today? In our case, it would be red and blue, whatever colors you might use.
You got the colors backwards for Canada.
Okay. So in other words, you know wherein lies the support. The question is one of turnout and passion. True?
Oh, absolutely. So the Liberals typically do well in Atlantic Canada, the far reaches of Eastern Canada. They'll win. There's 32 seats there. They'll win 25 to 30 of those seats. Then you go in the province of Quebec.
Just like our coast, if I can interrupt. I mean, just like, you would see the coast, the so-called coast.
Rhode Island, Maine, right? that sort of area. Rhode Island, Maine, that is very small population, but it makes a difference. Then we go to Quebec, which has got around 25% of the seats. And there you've got a battle between the Liberal Party and, as I said, this Bloc Québécois party. And there are parts that are very conservative, primarily rural parts of Quebec, that will go conservative. Then we get into Ontario. Ontario's the battleground. Imagine if you had California with the size and weight that California does, but you don't have a Texas or a Florida or a New York. So there's 338 seats in Canada. There's over 120 of them in the province of Ontario. And that is the battleground. The suburbs around the city of Toronto. There are more seats in the suburbs of Toronto than in the entire province of Alberta. So that is where the battleground is. When Stephen Harper and the Conservatives won a majority government in 2011, they won what we call the 905 region, just outside of Toronto. When Justin Trudeau won governments in 2015, 2019, that went to Trudeau. So the city of Toronto goes Liberal. Much of rural Ontario goes conservative, but it's the suburbs, and you can relate to this. You know, imagine the
Absolutely.
suburbs of Philadelphia as opposed to Philadelphia proper or rural Pennsylvania. That's the same thing in Ontario. You get to the prairies where I am, it's conservative heartland. The Liberals have some pockets in the big cities of Calgary and Edmonton and Winnipeg, but the Liberals will win, the Conservatives will win most of the prairies. Think, Montana, think North Dakota, South Dakota. Then you get to BC. BC is like Oregon. BC is like Washington. The Vancouver is like Seattle. It'll go Liberal or the NDP. The interior of BC, that is conservative, just like the Republicans are. So when I say it's a big country, you can see these regional matchups playing itself out.
Dr. Bratt, that was excellent. By the way, we are sending you a good man as the United States ambassador to Canada. I know him well, and I've known David L. Cohen for many, many years. For 3 decades, I've known him. He's very close to President Biden. I think you want to have, as the recipient, as the host of an ambassador, someone who really does have the ear of the president or prime minister, whatever the case may be. He is a solid citizen, and we're sending you our best. So enjoy him and treat him well, okay?
That's good. We've had good ambassadors in the past. I think specifically of a guy like Gordon Geffen, who is Bill Clinton's ambassador, but Kelly Craft, who was Trump's ambassador, spent more time in the United States than she did in Canada. She was not very good. And likewise, the relationship is so important to Canada. We put a very important ambassador in place, and usually it's not a regular diplomat. Usually it's someone with personal ties to the prime minister for the same reason.
He has them. I can tell you, on the day that Joe Biden formally announced his candidacy, he was at David L's house that night. This guy is no shrinking violet. He is a doer. Like, he is a tactician. You know that old expression, if you want something to get done, give it to a busy person.
Yeah.
That's him.
Well,
Anyway,
that's
that was
really
excellent.
good news to
I hope
hear.
good. I hope you'll come back. I really appreciate that. And you folks are good neighbors. So I wish you all good things in the election today.
Okay, so pay attention to your attic today.
Okay. Thank you for that.